Hello, my name's Amanda Wilson. I'm with AstraZeneca. I'm the head of Translational Biomarkers and Bioanalysis. And today I've got the pleasure of chairing this panel discussion where we're going to talk about the sharing of scientific data in the public domain.
So I'm Patrick Liu from Teva Pharmaceuticals. I'm heading a global bioassay group for PK, immunogenicity, and also biomarker as well.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Goodwin. I'm with KCS Bioanalytical and Biomarker Services. You can see our banner behind me. I'm the Executive Director and the Head of Bioanalytical Services.
Hello, I'm Melanie Anderson. I work at Merck and I head a group that does LC-MS analysis for large and small molecules.
Hi, my name is Jason Wrigley. I'm Global Senior Product Manager at Merck KGaA, also known as Millipore Sigma inside the USA and Canada.
Hello, I'm Shane Needham. I'm co-founder and chief scientific officer at Alturas Analytics, where we are a CRO and we're focused on LC-MS/MS and GC-MS/MS bioanalysis.
Okay, to kick off then, I'd like to ask the panel if they would share their thoughts on the importance of sharing scientific data in the public domain.
I'll go ahead and take a stab at that first. So I think it's very important that we publish. I do understand, though, that there is confidentiality and that the data is the property of the drug company and they could get burned if you publish too much information. But I do think that in generic terms that the sharing of scientific data is only going to allow us to bring more drugs to market in the future.
And I think it's important to be strategic about collaborations. If things can't be totally in the public domain, we need to think about ways to have non-disclosure agreements with, all our partners so that we're still sharing data but preserving IP when we need to.
Exactly.
Yep.
I think those are great ideas, and some of us on this panel have shared this before, but there might be a venue for in the future. What's been really exciting is to see the industry change a little bit. I don't know if the panel totally agrees with me or not on this, but we've had some discussion around this, is that it used to be that there was no sharing at all. You worked for company X or company Y and you never talked and you were not allowed to talk and you kept everything kind of just really close to your chest. But that seems to be changing a little bit. I mean, not necessarily with giving away IP or anything, but we know that to get data to the patients, which is what our ultimate goal is, to save lives, we have to share. And I think one of the things that we've talked about on this panel before, some of us offline, is that there might be a use for a different type of a publication that is, instead of in scientific terms, it's for patients, whether they have cancer or CNS diseases or Parkinson's, whatever it is, that then it's translated for them, so to speak, in a non-scientific language so they can read it and access it easier without giving away IP. That could be a whole journal of its own, possibly, now that we can disseminate so much information with social media and so on and so forth. That's what I'm excited about for the future, is maybe getting data directly to patients in that fashion.
So I totally agree with that. I think so, this not only stimulate people think about, the new ideas, you can look at the other people's data and share the data. Most important, I do agree, over time, this sharing concept evolving. There's a lot of information we digested, a lot of information you can learn, but also you share the information, you get the feedback. I think it's not only give, also you receiving. I think that's good point to share, but of course, different company, IP, all those things need to take into consideration as well.
Yeah, I think if we, think about the patient more, if we think, what does the patient do? We all know somebody who's had a disease of some form. The first thing we do is go straight on the internet. We don't know everything about everything, so we do our own research. Like Shane said, the ability to be able to get good data is key. How much has to be shared and in exactly what format. We have the ability to understand some of the terminologies that are used, some of the error bars that may be included in some of this. Maybe people don't need to see everything, but how much do they need to see? I want to see everything. If I'm a patient, I want to know everything there is possibly to know about that disease, so I can make an educated decision about my treatment. I can challenge my surgeon, my clinician. I want to be able to do that.
You bring up a very good point. I think the challenge of that is currently, in this current format, is And obviously, a lot of us are scientists, so we like more information. I'm not sure that that's the majority of the public. They want enough information to make a decision. And what can you believe on the internet now? We don't know.
That is
We are able probably to look at information and scientifically make an assessment to say this makes sense or it doesn't make sense. What are error bars? Let's admit it. There's a lot of the public that may not even know what error bars mean. You know, a grandmother that's 80 or 90 years old, she might not have that education. And so I think that's why it's important to maybe have some kind of even a scientific or a separate journal or somehow some type of a media that is peer reviewed, so to speak, that it can really, really be trusted. I don't know what that consists of, but that could be.
So also the sharing can have different ways, not only publications, conferences, presentations, panel discussions. I think so what I value the sharing of the data information is really created a very good environment, for scientific, for technology development. Most importantly, for patient benefit for the whole community. I think the data, each company, each laboratory they generated, only they get together and can make it bigger, make it more powerful for development. I think that's the value for the future.
Well, I think in the future, in about 10 years from now, we're talking about personalized medicine. You're going to see a lot more of these clinician portals that are for patients where they can actually have a code when they go apply to a clinical trial and they can get their information even though it may be a blinded study, because we're talking about personalized medicine. So I think in 5 to 10 years from now, that's probably going to become a pretty popular idea because we are having this outcry for patients wanting to know what their data is from the trial so that they can better treat themselves and have that conversation with their physician. So I think looking down the road, that's going to become a reality sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think that we can help in making that data more understandable to the patient population? Because you're right, they're going to want to see their own data, but actually it's really technically complex, even ourselves. Within our discipline we can understand our data, but when we're looking across disciplines within the pharmaceutical industry, we need some education to comprehend some of that data. So how do we help the patients take that data and understand it so that they don't get concerned about the data, they have full understanding of what that means for them?
Well, and that's really, it's, the physician should drive some of those conversations as well. Of course, the more data that people have access to, in theory, this is a wonderful thing, right? That, technology is bringing this all, we can all have more numbers about ourselves, and this is meaningful stuff. But, we as an industry need to find ways to communicate that effectively, first of all. And then also, they need to work in partnership with healthcare providers to understand these things and make better choices for themselves. So, and I think a good example for that is, clinical trials. People are, let's say someone has cancer, they need information about what trials are out there. They need to understand the kind of cancer they have, and they need to help with their physician make those decisions. Yep. So it's a delicate balance of, people out in the world having access to their data and also to someone who can help them understand their data.
Right. I think right now we talk about the different levels sharing the information. So one is among the labs research between the researchers, also how to share with the patient, how to share with doctors, the trial managers, all those information, and they use the data shared. I think have different values, right? Patient understand how important for the treatment for themselves, but for doctors they understand this data, how they can guide them to treat the patient. I think these really have different level of values, from different level, different perspective, you can say.
Yeah, those are really good points. I think the challenge of that is with our communities and our healthcare systems as we move forward is the main role of a MD or clinician is the safety and the outcome of the patient. And so we would put an additional task on them to say, hey, let's educate the patients. I wonder if it's something like a different role, like technical writers or editors would say, we can make a journal like this, we can make a dissemination of information like this, and then the MD the clinician just has to refer to it and tell the patient, hey, this is where this data can be available, and it's really easy to understand. It's very clear. It's peer reviewed, so to speak. I wonder if that's an approach as well, so we can make sure that we bridge the gap between the science, which is hard to understand a lot of times, and the patient, which most of us know a lot of patients who are our relatives, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters. If they're not scientists, they don't want to look at data. They really don't.
They just want to know what the answer is and what the outcome is and what their best choice
the
will
next
be.
step?
What's the next step for me to go forward so that I can become healthy or get better?
Yeah, and so I wonder if it would be a collaboration with technical writers and that speak layman terms or know how to write it in layman terms, maybe have a science background that can bridge the gap between patients and the actual science and the data. I don't know. That would be something brand new. I don't see why we couldn't do that. And there are certainly roles for editors and so on and so forth in that arena.
Well, I don't know if it needs to be a publication. I mean, I think often when patients, get that diagnosis, they go find forums online already. A lot of these like Facebook groups already exist, especially for rare diseases. And then I think that's a way for people to access, what has worked for other people, doctors that have worked, on this particular condition. So, there's also a social media component of this that's not necessarily the data, but that's access to the appropriate care that I need.
Yeah,
and just information in that space.
We talked about this at CPSA Europe, and I totally agree. And I don't know, as scientists, have you ever gone to some of those forums?
Oh, yeah.
And there's lots of misinformation.
Especially the oncology forums, right?
Yeah, and and it's because everybody gets a voice, and that's good. Everybody should have a voice, but some of it is scientifically incorrect, and so what can be trusted? That's the big social media question right now in the world. What social media can be trusted? Those are really, really difficult things to answer. And so that's why peer-reviewed journals came about years ago. And at CPSA Europe, there was a really good history of peer-reviewed journals and publications, and really, really neat. And I just wonder if we kind of have to start from scratch to get that data to patients that they can actually trust. I love forums. I love open forums.
That's where it has to come from a source that is going to be trusted and not just
Exactly.
an open forum, because anybody can write anything in an open forum.
Yeah.
And you really have to have that level of trust from a healthcare provider or from the drug company or somebody that's in authority that can actually say this is what it really means.
And maybe it's a forum that's actually, this is hard to manage. Maybe in a hospital or something, but that somebody manages the forum, like it's their own account type of thing.
Yeah.
And they manage some of and when somebody says something maybe that might not be great information, they can have a discussion on that. And so maybe that's what it is. That's a lot to manage.
I think
Right,
also part of the
Full-time
problem
job.
is if somebody has a terminal illness, you latch onto anything.
Yes.
So, we might be, thinking we're going to do this and we're going to make it all correct. But the honest answer is if you are diagnosed with a terminal illness, any hope is some hope.
That's right.
So whether it's correct information, incorrect information, you'll pick something up and run with it. Well, that might be actually worse than not doing anything at all.
Yeah.
You know.
That's a very good point.
So how do we combat that? How do we,
Because there might not be one right answer.
No.
Because it's personalized medicine,
Personalized
right? And everybody's
medicine.
different.
That's why.
But this exact point, if we have more sharing, more transparent, you can avoid the misinterpretation. We talk about the two things. What I understand here is the two different things. One thing is the raw data, how to share the data, and how the media use the data to interpret the data. So I think this is really bring the point. If more data shared, more reality will be shown. And then the interpretation based on the big data, based on the totality of the data, instead of use a piece of the data to make a conclusion. I think that's really from another perspective, sharing the data, how we, in the public or domain, I think it's important.
I think you bring up a really good point there with the media there, in the fact that the media is there to make money. So the more data we share, the more opportunity they have to take whichever statistical part of that data they choose to get a headline. Mm-hmm. And we all know headlines can be absolutely terrible. We found a cure for this. Well, we haven't. We have some data that may suggest it works in an animal. We aren't even close.
Yeah.
So how much do we share?
So
Yeah.
they're going to want to know why it doesn't work for everybody when it's only a minor subpopulation
So-
that has a particular gene.
How do we manage
Yeah.
that? I mean, what's our role as scientists? What's our role as working in the industry where we want to deliver therapeutics to patients and cure disease? That's a hard one. Are we powerful enough to influence the media? I don't know.
I think it does come down, like you said, to sharing. The more we can share as companies, which is going to be the biggest challenge because of IP, because of we want, the bottom line is as a company, we want to make money. If we share too much too early, do we lose that advantage?
Right.
Yeah.
And
So
where does that fit into the whole
I
thing?
think looking to what happened about 10 to 15 years ago when you started getting all these disparate drug companies working together, creating co-medication oncology drugs. They both owned the IP because they each had something in the stake, right? They each had skin in the game. Each one had a drug in the game. And then they were able to co-market these medications that can help save lives. And I think that worked out really well. So I think you may start to see more of that as we go forward when we get to personalized medicine.
So there are some mechanisms we can share, utilize each party's strengths. Of course, we have to, through the path, to ensure the confidentiality, the IP. But again, I think the network of collaboration, sharing the data, can make it even powerful than individual players. So there's a lot of cases in the pharmaceutical company, company working together, develop a drug or working on some challenges together, utilize each other's strengths and specialties. I think so we do have a lot of good example on that. And it's not only for sharing data, sharing experience, share skills, share technologies, the same concept. So I hope we can utilize this concept, use the data sharing. I believe in the future, this sharing can be a big, benefit for the society.
So to think about a different angle on this, we've talked about all the good things. What about some of the bad things? The more data we share, the more potential we have for an unscrupulous person, company, globally to take that data, suggest that if they took two different types of generic compounds that they've created could cure X, Y, and Z, we could potentially fuel that market.
Yeah.
Well, I think
right.
also patient privacy is a concern when you start to get into personalized medicine.
Yep.
And how does pharma across the industry share this information to come up with these good ideas for drug targets and preserve patient privacy? So the downsides are both the IPP thing and patient privacy. And I think as this new stuff evolves, those are the things we have to keep coming back to make sure we're still preserving some of those things
Those
while
are-
getting the advantages of the
Those are
data
the
sharing.
checks and balances to make sure that we don't go too far,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So those are in place to make sure that we protect the patient's privacy. It's always do clinical trials that are blind or double blind.
Even more than that, I mean, I think as more and more data is going to be delivered to our smartphones, there's going to have to be a technology collaboration there. Is that secure? I mean, it's going to be in between. It's going to be talking to the ND and the clinician, which is great, personalized medicine and home sampling and all of that. Is that secure? Are we protecting the patient, the privacy of the patient? I think that's a very good question. That could be very difficult to do when you start sharing that type of technology, which is available for anybody to possibly hack into.
Yeah, I think nowadays I think there's a lot of information you can get from different way, but I think things how to utilize more health way instead of utilize the data for something negative. Right, you're right. I think the world is changing. Even your personal information there, the people can't get it. But how we can prevent negative usage, utilize this way more useful data for good things. Patient information, drug information, whatever the trials, all those. I think if some people do it, I think get the data, but I think we talk about the more collaborations, collaborative sharing, in the way can really benefit, for the patient. End of the day is to have something creative, for the partner, for all the parties.
So if you look at it from an altruistic point of view, we're hoping that the good outweighs the bad. And I have to believe that the good will outweigh the bad when we move down this road. Because I think the collaboration that we have between the companies, both with the drug companies and with the CRO companies, we're going to be able to provide more medicine for the patients and be able to solve some real technical and serious problems.
Very good points. And I think if we live in fear of what the bad could be, we'll never move forward.
Exactly.
Exactly.
You know, we have to have enough courage to move forward and say, well, there's going to be some bad. There always has been in history, but let's move forward to the good. And the bottom line is, patients are calling for this. They want this. At this point, we're probably holding them back more than they want it. And they're like, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. And so we have to come up with ways to say, well, how can we move this forward and try to deliver to the patients that's ultimately what they want, is their own data for their own health outcomes.
And we need to understand also, this is a different world than it was when I grew up, when I was a teenager, or when I was in college. I had to go to the library, and I had to use bibliography cards. My daughters had smartphones at the age of 4, and they were on the internet at the age of 5. And so the world is more savvy. There's more data at their fingertips. And so it really comes down to an evolving evolution of this data is available. And these people, being the patients and the general public, they're smarter and more savvier, and they're wanting to have access to it.
And how can we change that?
That's
How can
right.
we deliver it to them? Yeah, that's our role. We have to.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, we're all talking about patient confidentiality, and totally agree. But what if the patients don't want that?
They're going to change the rules.
Yeah.
I really think
And
that's
if
coming down the board.
If they want to share their data, if they're terminally ill, if they
Yeah.
have a unique illness and they want to share their data, why can't we make it open source? So
Exactly.
the people out there who have, some mathematical algorithm ability to look at data in a different way to us, maybe they could cure some of
That's
these.
a very good point.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
But do you think that we might run the risk of only showing a snapshot when you've got individuals that want to share their data?
And you just have an anecdote, you don't
Yeah.
are you going to get a high enough N?
Yeah, I think earlier it was mentioned, about wanting to make sure that you share the whole picture and the full data set, because that in its entirety is what we are able to draw conclusions
That's
on
the
and
story.
take the right interpretation from.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good point, Amanda. And there's always that risk of a snapshot. Again, as scientists, we're probably going to collect data for the rest of our lives. So everything's just one little snapshot that makes a big, long picture or movie.
Yeah.
And so if it's just a snapshot that helps a patient because it worked for person Y in Japan and they're in the UK and they want to try it too, is that a bad thing? If it's not going to do any harm? And it probably depends on the situation, right?
Yeah.
So the more data we give them, the more that they can probably be educated enough to try to make that decision. And not easy answers for sure. Not easy.
No easy answer there at all.
No.
So I guess, thinking about us as bioanalysts and the data that we're generating in our laboratories on a daily basis, have we got any thoughts about our responsibility for sharing the data that we're generating that would be able to be in a more patient-centric way? I think, a point was made earlier, if we're presenting data in a manuscript that's very technical, is there an option to present that data in a less technical way, but giving the right salient messages around our data?
There are other publications that are available that are more for general consumption as opposed to the Journal of Bioanalytical Chemistry or the Journal of American Society of Mass Spectrometry. You can look at Nature. I mean, I've seen a lot of good articles in there that don't go into the technical detail, but you can tell that the authors really went into it, but they kind of glossed over that just for the general conclusion. And there's other forums that would be available that can be done to. I do believe that we have access to that now. We just have to get out of that route where we automatically go to the peer-reviewed journal, right? We can go to some other kind of forum there with our data.
Well, Amanda, you bring up another good point, and I wonder too, as biological chemists, if some of the methods and even techniques that we produce, whether it be dried blood spot, for example, home sampling, and there's been a lot of technology, that's a good example about how to do those things at home, patients can relate to that directly. I mean, if they have if they have cancer and they have to go visit an oncology center every 48 hours to take a sample, and we've all seen these people, they're sick. They take a cab ride, they get in a wheelchair, and if they can see that in a way that helps them, so how do we disseminate that information without worrying about reproducibility and accuracy? And I mean, that's our own data, and we have to worry about that. They don't care about that. They just want to say, oh my gosh, I get to stay home and send my sample to somebody else and they can see it, and so there might be another venue for that type of publication. I mean, that's what is exciting.
And I feel like, at-home sampling is an interesting thing too, because not only, is this something wonderful for patients that we need to be communicating with patients about as a way and a path and like a way to get more data, more meaningful data out of trials and out of treatment of patients, but we also need to be pushing the rest of the industry. So when we talk about designing a trial, I don't get to design a trial as a bioanalytical chemist. I've got to work with all the clinicians and everybody involved, and we've almost got to sell it to them too. And so there's a lot of different pieces of like communication around these, at home, and there's also the data integration piece. There's a lot around that that's about data sharing and communication and making sure that we execute properly.
I wonder if the easiest way to do that is get patients involved in design of clinical trials.
Yeah.
You know what they're going to want.
Yeah.
I think the one thing is probably everyone working bioanalytical, the big challenge is to interpret the immunogenicity data and working with clinical physicians, right? We as a bioanalytical scientist develop the assays and analyze the samples, report the result for immunogenicities, but how we can connect the immunogenicity data to patient safety and efficacy, and how to make sure we're speaking the same languages. So I think that's, used to be a big challenge. I think now with the data sharing and the communication within the company across different functional group, and that changes. I think educated and the physician got educated, and then we learned, from their perspective that what they're looking for. I think there's a total difference compared to 10 years ago.
So I suppose that's another angle, isn't it, around scientific data sharing. We're not now talking about the patient, but actually we're talking about other really important stakeholders
Right.
that are managing a patient's care and helping them understand our data so that they can best advise and interpret the information that they're receiving. So that's another way that we may need to think about tailoring the way that we present our data.
I think the key is always going to be our customer, and our customer being the surgeon, the clinician, the GP. What do they actually want to see? We're great at presenting the data how the FDA require it or how the pharmaceutical company require it if we're a CRO. But if we look at what does our actual end customer want? What does the GP want to see, or the surgeon? If all they want to see is a red light or a green light, a go or no go, of healthy, not healthy, go for surgery, not go for surgery, why are we trying to do too much?
Well, I wonder if, and I agree with you, I think in the past, the GP or the MD or the clinician has been the actual one that drives what they want, but shouldn't it be the patient? And we also know that sometimes that clinicians, they're so busy that they can be removed from that patient sometimes. And they'll even, I think it's changing. You can now question your MD. If we talk, the generation ahead of us probably, you never ask a question to your MD. You just did what they said because there was no educational information out there. Now we're all educated and we can get some information. So I wonder if our ultimate client, so to speak, should be our patient. And I believe that's one of the, we're not focusing on that in our industry. We're focusing on not the final outcome of that patient, but the final outcome of the hospital or the insurance company or the pharmaceutical company, which we all have the same goal in mind: healthy patients. And I think we've kind of lost. We need to really focus on that patient being the ultimate client.
The next part of the panel discussion, I'd like to suggest that we take the opportunity to share our thoughts on how to go about writing a manuscript. I think if we were to advise our younger selves, what might we be telling them on how to get started with writing for a journal?
I mean, so I think the first part of writing well is to read. So I think, we need to be encouraging our young scientists to be reading lots of publications and get familiar with, the sort of approaches people take and the ideas that they have around the publications that they are making. So I think that's a piece of it. I think some mentorship for younger scientists is really important about, giving them the time and the resources and the advice to sort of map out maybe their first publication. Some of that, obviously if somebody's coming into the industry with a PhD has already been done. But I think, if someone hasn't, that's a useful tool for people to have.
I agree with that. I mean, for working in a CRO industry, that's a little nuanced because you have to get permission from pharma before you can do any publication because they actually own the data. And that can be a little tricky sometimes with the IP where they would like to get the submission in before they actually publish. And so then it can become a little meaningless, as somebody had mentioned earlier. But it still is important to get young scientists that mentorship and the ability to try to publish. I think it's very important.
Yeah, I certainly think, like you said, doing as much reading as you can as early as you can. We need to ensure that what we want to read is open source and we can access it because, not everybody can afford or has the ability to access all of these papers. So I think the more open source we can do, the better chance we have.
So I think it's for the young scientists working through prepare the presentation. Also, the value is to, they go through the experiment, from design, data collection, result, discussions, all those things really refresh their mind. It's a part of retraining. I think for them, it is part of career development, not only they publish a paper, but most important, they can go back, from the preparation of the publications, they learned what is important, what is critical. What mistake they make. I think that's a really good exercises for their experience. I think that's really beneficial.
Yeah, those very good points. I'm thinking about my history, my career, probably like all of you are as well. I'm thinking of some of those first publications and really to think about it's a process, right? It's to focus on that process. And I think one of the things to focus on too is that it's a process, there's going to be mistakes made, and that's all part of the process instead of the outcome. Thinking about the outcome though, it would be what is unique about it? Why is this? Why does the public want to see this? Why do my colleagues want to see this? Why would a patient want to see this data? And I think focusing on what the purpose of the actual article is, why is it unique, who wants to see it, why would it be good for the public, I think that always drove me a little bit to say, well, I want to get this out there because I want people to see it for some reason, and focusing on that process at the same time. And you have to read a lot. That's definitely true. You have to know what else is out there. You might write a whole paper and it's like, this is just a repeat of somebody else's work if you haven't actually done your research.
Right. It's true. I think it's to take your point, what you said, I think important things, for bioanalyticals, very technology driven. A lot of things, ideas, even do the troubleshooting, even the assay development. You look at the publications, you say, oh, when I designed the assay, I never think about this. Even though, for a sample thing, like reduce the background of the assay. How we can reduce the background? You look at the different publications that say, oh, by this way I, block the noise. And later on, you learned and then you published another things that other people learned from you. I think, this is really, learn each other. I think, it is a very.
That's what's fun about science. It's all vertical, right?
Right, exactly.
That's the key, and that's one of the unique positions that we're in as scientists. We are building upon what people have done previous to us, and other people are going to build in the future what we've done. So it's that iterative process where we're constantly making it better. Yeah. And I think that's really what's unique and very key for young scientists to really hone in on, that they're part of that process. And once they publish, then their paper gets cited or somebody references that, and then they come up with the next step. And these people and the scientists can go back and learn from that too as well.
It's the old adage, nothing is new, but everything is new.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. And so nothing is really unique because there's a history behind it, but there's just these incremental steps that make it better and better and better. And you think about, a lot of times we look back over our technology development over the last 6 months or a year, and it's like, oh, nothing's happened. But then you look back 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, it's like, wow, a lot has happened in that time.
I mean, I
period.
suppose based on on what you're just saying around, there's a theme of adding and building on past experience, and I just wondered whether anybody's got any thoughts on the publication of data that didn't go well, because that's also really
that's
useful from an
powerful.
education.
That's very
And
powerful.
I feel that we're always so very positive about the things that we publish, but we've learnt lots of lessons, and we've learnt lessons the hard way. Should we be putting more of those lessons out there?
Yeah, I think
You should take this one. We were talking about sometimes thinking that, we only have to publish
Oh, yeah.
good things.
Yeah.
And that's not always the learning process.
No, it is.
Yeah, but
It's the hardest
majority
thing to do.
The majority of things in science are failures.
Yeah. I mean,
And then you do another experiment. That's what a hypothesis and the whole scientific method is about. It's about failures and then learning from that. So how do you publish those? I think all of our egos are too big to publish
agree.
failures. Isn't that how it goes usually?
Yeah, that's what
You
we
know, and our
discussed
companies
here.
don't want to publish that. You know?
And would they be accepted?
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Very good point.
I mean, would peer review be a positive?
but I mean,
the reviewers like, what is this?
some of the best forums, though, are where people have said, "I tried this, it didn't work. What else should I try?" And then the best forums I've ever been on, you have this whole collection of, "Well, don't do this. This didn't work either," and then everybody starts to chip in, and everyone's happy as soon as somebody's put their hand up and said, "I made a mistake."
That's
Well, you
right.
didn't make a mistake. You did good science.
That's right.
And proved it didn't work.
So we need to start.
So how do we do?
We need to start a journal of just negative research.
Positive, negative.
Positive, negative research. Yes.
Amanda, I think we do see some publications is, that's mistakes, but there's solution for it. They identify what the problem caused the mistakes and what the improvement. I think very often see that part, but just to present the mistake, and it's not a
No
comment.
solution, yeah.
Yeah.
And realistically,
So-
we all know we've all published.
Yeah.
90% of the mistakes are not published.
No.
Even with just one method. You don't go, you talk about maybe one mistake that then you solved.
Yeah.
One problem that then you solved.
So-
The rest of them, you don't.
That's how most presentations are too. When I give a presentation, it's a story, right? What went wrong? What did we do to try to fix it? And how did we solve it, right? That's the whole picture. So I think as scientists, we're all taught that's the schematic that we go with, but it doesn't include every little nitty-gritty mistake along the way. It's the overview and the top layer of the fundamental core problem and what we did to solve it, and then what the results were and how good it was.
Well, and you wonder too, I mean, taking this a step further when we try to, because really what we do as biological scientists ultimately is to treat disease and to cure disease. And that's our ultimate goal. As cool as it is to make methods and new techniques and stuff, that's really cool. We love that. But what about all those probably trials and whatnot that are negative trials that patients don't know about or that others don't know about, but would be very key in helping somebody else get a therapeutic to market? I think we're onto something bigger here. And it's actually exciting to talk about because it's a scientific method.
Oh, yeah.
It is. I mean, just because the data didn't work in some way, maybe that was a unique cohort. Maybe actually it could have worked for something else, like you say. I mean, there's a whole opportunities.
or they named the endpoint incorrectly.
Correct.
And so it was a good a good therapeutic, but they got the endpoint wrong, so it fails the clinical trial, even though it actually succeeded.
Yeah,
You know?
Right.
Yeah, data is king,
Yeah.
but it's understanding and interpretation of the data, and the person looking at it is looking at it subjectively, not looking at the bigger picture. I think that's always going to be the challenge. We're trying to solve one thing, because that's what we're doing.
Well, a lot of drugs on the market right now are the second or third indication. They weren't they didn't pass the mustard, if you will, to get to their first indication, and they were rerouted, and they came about just because of some serendipitously, and others because they wanted to try the drug in another target, and it actually worked in the target, and it was much better, and they were able to find a drug. So, that happens, and that's all part of science.
So getting back to publication, what is our expectation of the publishers that we are actually submitting our manuscripts to? Thinking about that education piece, what would be useful to have in terms of our relationship with publishers that maybe we could get over some of the barriers to publishing?
I think some of it's got to be education of the younger generation. If we want to inspire these younger, even thinking about, school children, they're going to be the next people that are doing these presentations, they're writing these. They're now being trained in school how to give presentations from a really, really early age. So how do we help give them the skills that we've amassed early enough so that they actually push further forward faster? Because if they learn, like you say, you've got to do your research. Well, how? Well, everybody uses internet. So actually, whatever we do should be searchable in a way that the next generation is going to use it. If we use the keywords and the things that we use, that might not be what they use.
Well,
so what's the next generation?
Yeah, and if we drive that education, I thought as I teach courses globally, and if you're under 30, you do not want to sit in a classroom.
No.
And you it's not even on the internet, it's on your phone.
Yep.
All your information is on your phone. And how do we, as publishers and as scientists, to mentor them, that we're all talking about, how do we educate that? Because I'm old school, and I always thought, well, it's better to have the professor in the room. It's better. Okay, I still think that's a better approach, but it's not going backwards. That's the days of brick and mortar schools are going away. So how do we deliver this education we mentor and we publish and we present with our publishers? How do we get this information to them? And if the presentation's much over 5 minutes, forget it. They don't have, it's just that generation they're in. They're on to the next thing. They can't sit in a classroom for an hour and go like this, and so those are challenges. But as for those that have children and that are in the teenage years, that is just how it's going to be. And so how do we help with that? It's a challenge.
You almost need to podcast everything.
Podcast everything, yeah.
How do you podcast a 200-page, write-up of something that's incredibly scientifically correct? Because like you say, if you don't get their attention within the first 10 seconds, it's gone.
Yeah. I remember about 10 years ago, anecdotally, here's a story with my daughters. I'm sitting there putting a PowerPoint presentation together for the pharmaceutical company I worked with at the time, and I just could not get the animation to work right. And so my daughters come up and said, "Oh, we can fix that for Dad," and they just fixed it, and it worked out brilliantly. And I'm like, "What'd you do?" They said, "Well, this." I'm like, "Never mind. Don't want to know. It's fixed." But here you're looking at the 16-year-old and a 17-year-old at the time, and they were able to do it because they've been trained in school since they were little kids to work on PowerPoint presentations. So that's the power of the school with the electronics and the new mindset. I mean, just imagine what their kids are going to be able to do.
So how do we get these journals into the schools? How do we
That's
get
right.
these processes
That's right.
into the schools?
The data and the publications. I kind of wonder if the old conventional term journal will eventually go away.
Well, you're getting webcasts now. You're getting webinars. You have Bioanalysis Zone, who has a website. There's a lot more electronic media out there now, and it's really starting to look at the days of the newspaper.
And
you
I'm
know,
finding
you wake up every
myself-
day and get a newspaper.
Yeah, and I'm finding myself, I like those things too. They're summarized.
That's
they're
right.
distinct. It summarizes a whole. Whereas you get your journal delivered to your mailbox in paper form.
Yeah.
Does anybody open it anymore, or do they use their electronic form?
I use electronic.
Exactly.
It's searchable.
exactly.
And I don't have to sit there and go page by page.
Yeah.
This is
So
a future challenge, not only talking about the different type of media, so variety different media, currently, in the future have more, And meanwhile, the challenge for us, how we can prepare ourselves. We talk about the young generation, they don't like the classical journal, and different type of media, the most convenient media. So how we can put our data, analytical data, into that media, and let them to pick up. So I think this may be some challenge we have to think about.
I think we have a lot more questions than answers. I don't think we have the answers. Well, it'll be fun to watch, though. It'll be really fun it changes quickly.
And maybe the place to start is, I think, podcasts were mentioned, and thinking about educating younger scientists on how to start writing manuscripts, start presenting their data sets. Perhaps that's something that we could do with the Bioanalysis Zone. Get a number of different podcasts from experts who have got lots of experience with how to approach research, how to approach writing a manuscript, and put them out there and then publicise them for young scientists.
It's aimed around gaming and things as well. Is there some element of that we could use to capture the interest of those people that are getting immersed into this whole digital world? We must remember that in a few years' time, people don't interact like we interact. That's right. We still pick up the phone. I still phone people. My children just laugh at me.
They use a phone for everything besides making a phone call.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, is there something we could do? In the game arena, I don't know.
Bioanalysis, the virtual reality game.
Why not?
You have a mass spectrometer that has a sword or something. And some of the Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know. Yeah, who knows?
Who knows where the future is going to take us? And maybe that's a point at which to close this panel discussion. I'd like to thank everybody for great contributions. I think that there's some great ideas that we've maybe started to talk about today, and maybe we can work collaboratively in order to bring some of those things to life in association with the Bioanalysis Zone.
Thank you, Amanda.
What's that, sorry?
Thank